In the vast tapestry of the history of the Catholic Church, few figures shine with the intensity of Saint Thomas Aquinas, the Angelic Doctor. His life, which unfolded in the splendid 13th century, represents the perfect harmony between faith and reason, between the pursuit of knowledge and the love of God. This is the story of a man who forever changed Christian thought. Chapter 1. The Early Years of a Genius. In the imposing castle of Roccasecca near Aquino, Italy, the year 1225 marked the birth of one who would become one of the greatest thinkers in Christian history. Landulf and Theodora, Counts of Aquino, welcomed their youngest son with great hopes, unaware of the extraordinary destiny that awaited him. From his earliest years, little Thomas exhibited an insatiable curiosity. The monks of Monte Cassino, where he was sent at the age of 5 according to noble family custom, were astonished by his deep questions and his early inclination toward divine matters. "What is God?" the little boy would ask, leaving his teachers dumbfounded. In the Benedictine cloisters, Thomas found his first spiritual home. The rhythms of monastic life, the Gregorian chant that resonated in the abbey church, and contemplative silence shaped his young soul. His tutors soon noticed that he was not an ordinary child. While other boys played in the courtyards, Thomas could spend hours absorbed in reading the church fathers. The war between the Pope and Emperor Frederick II forced his parents to bring him back home when he was 10 years old. However, the seeds of his vocation were already planted in his heart. In Naples, where he continued his studies, the young Thomas discovered two loves that would mark his life: Aristotelian philosophy and the order of preachers, the Dominicans. The years at the University of Naples were decisive. While his peers succumbed to the temptations of student life, Thomas maintained a life of prayer and study. His professors saw in him an exceptional mind, capable of penetrating the deepest mysteries of philosophy and theology. Chapter 2. The Sacred Rebellion. Thomas's decision to join the Order of Preachers struck like lightning in the family castle. The Dominicans, a newly founded mendicant order, were not considered worthy of a noble son. His mother, Theodora, especially, could not conceive that her youngest son would choose a life of poverty and preaching. The family first attempted gentle persuasion. They sent letters, emissaries, even the abbot of Monte Cassino, to convince Thomas to reconsider his decision. But the young man remained steadfast. "My decision comes from God," he calmly, determinedly replied, "and to him I must obey before men." Frustrated by his resistance, his older brothers resorted to drastic measures. As Thomas traveled to Paris to continue his studies, he was intercepted near Aquapendente. The soldiers, following family orders, kidnapped him and took him to the family castle, where he remained a prisoner for almost a year. During his captivity, Thomas transformed his cell into a sanctuary of study and prayer. His sisters, sent to persuade him, ended up being convinced by him of the beauty of the religious vocation. Legend has it that when his brother sent a courtesan to tempt him, Thomas drove her away with a burning ember, then drew a cross on the wall. Finally, faced with his unyielding determination, and possibly due to the Pope's intervention, the family relented. Thomas was released and was able to reunite with the Dominicans, thus beginning his true religious life. This episode demonstrated not only his strength of character, but also his deep conviction to follow the divine call. Chapter 3. The Silent Student. In Paris, under the tutelage of the great Albert the Great, Thomas finally found the environment his brilliant mind needed. However, his contemplative nature and his corpulence earned him the nickname Silent Ox among his peers, who mistook his silence for simplicity. Albert the Great, recognizing the genius hidden behind that silent exterior, pronounced his famous words, "You call him the silent ox, but I assure you that his mooing in doctrine will one day resonate throughout the world." In classes, Thomas absorbed all knowledge with astonishing capacity, beginning to develop his own synthesis between Aristotelian philosophy and Christian theology. The period of study in Cologne profoundly marked his intellectual method. Under Albert's guidance, he learned to combine empirical observation with abstract reasoning, patristic tradition with new philosophical currents. His methodical mind began to forge the tools he would later use to build his great theological synthesis. The years of formation were also times of intense spiritual life. Thomas spent long hours in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, where, according to his own words, "I learned more than in all the books." His peers began to notice that after these prayer sessions, his understanding of the most complex theological problems seemed to miraculously clarify. Despite his brilliance, Thomas always maintained deep humility. When his classmates finally discovered the depth of his knowledge during a public debate, they were astonished. The silent ox revealed himself as a consummate teacher, capable of explaining the deepest truths with crystal clarity. Chapter 4. The Teacher of Paris. The classrooms of the University of Paris had never seen a teacher like Thomas. At 32 years old, the young Dominican conquered the chair of theology with a brilliance that attracted students from all over Europe. His teaching method revolutionized the medieval academy. Scholastic disputes under his direction became true quests for truth. Thomas had the gift of presenting opposing arguments with such clarity that his opponents were often surprised to see their own positions improved. His respect for truth, whatever its origin, earned him both admirers and critics. Amid university controversies over the role of mendicant orders, Thomas emerged as a serene yet firm defender. His treatise, Contra impugnantes de cultum et religionem, not only defended the Dominicans, but also established fundamental principles on religious life. Long hours of teaching did not diminish his life of prayer. Students commented that before each class, they found him kneeling before the crucifix, consulting with Christ on the most difficult doubts. His ability to unite the highest intellectual speculation with the deepest piety amazed everyone. His fame as a teacher transcended the university walls. Soon, students from all faculties attended his lectures, attracted by his clarity of thought and his ability to make the deepest truths accessible. Chapter 5. The Inspired Pen. The years in Paris marked the beginning of his most productive period as a writer. Thomas worked with superhuman energy, simultaneously dictating to several secretaries on different subjects. His contemporaries claimed that he wrote at the same speed others read. The creation of his commentaries on Aristotle revolutionized the medieval understanding of the philosopher. Thomas achieved what seemed impossible, reconciling Aristotelian thought with Christian doctrine. His work opened new horizons for theology and philosophy, establishing a fruitful dialogue between faith and reason. His works were not mere academic exercises. Each page revealed his passionate quest for truth and his desire to lead others toward it. The Summa contra Gentiles, written during this period, demonstrated his ability to dialogue with other religious and philosophical traditions. Witnesses described extraordinary moments during his writing process. They often saw him levitate while working, absorbed in contemplation. His secretary, Reginald of Piperno, assured that many pages seemed more dictated by heaven than the product of human reasoning. The variety and depth of his writings astonished his contemporaries. From philosophical treatises to biblical commentaries, from Eucharistic hymns to responses to practical inquiries, his pen seemed inexhaustible and always inspired. Chapter 6. The Counselor of Kings. Despite his preference for contemplative life, Thomas was frequently called upon to advise the powerful of his time. Popes and kings valued both his wisdom and his moral integrity. His counsel was sought not only on theological matters, but also on political and social issues. King Louis IX of France, later canonized, developed a special friendship with Thomas. Conversations between the Holy King and the Holy Theologian during meals at the French court became legendary. It is said that Thomas, absorbed in a theological problem, would strike the table exclaiming, "This refutes the Manichaeans." completely forgetting the actual presence. His advice always sought the common good and justice. In his political writings, such as De Regno, Thomas established fundamental principles on good governance and the relationship between the church and the state. His ideas on natural law and justice would influence political thought for centuries. Thomas's humility shone especially at court. While others sought royal favors, he maintained his Dominican simplicity. Once, when offered the Archbishopric of Naples, he refused, preferring to continue his work as a simple preaching brother. His interventions at court were always marked by prudence and charity. Even when he had to correct the powerful, he did so with such tact and clarity that his words were received with gratitude rather than resentment. Chapter 7. The Defender of Truth. In an era of intense theological debates, Thomas stood out as a tireless defender of truth. His public disputes attracted crowds, not only for his intellectual brilliance, but also for his ability to maintain charity amidst the fiercest debates. The controversy over the use of Aristotle in Christian theology found in Thomas its most skillful mediator. While some wanted to ban the philosopher and others followed him blindly, Thomas demonstrated how natural reason could serve faith without compromising it. His revolutionary synthesis transformed medieval thought. His debates with the Latin Averroists, especially with Siger of Brabant, demonstrated his mastery in using reason in the service of faith. Thomas refuted errors without despising the partial truths he found in his opponents, earning respect even from his adversaries. The defense of mendicant orders against secular masters showed his intellectual courage. Amid personal and political attacks, Thomas maintained serenity, responding with solid arguments and Christian charity. His treatise Contra Impugnantes became a model of constructive polemics. His quest for truth was never a merely academic exercise. For Thomas, all truth came from God and led to him. His disputes always ended in prayer, asking for light for himself and his opponents. Chapter 8. The Intellectual Mystic. Behind the rigorous intellectual was the heart of a mystic. Testimonies from his contemporaries speak of frequent ecstasies during the celebration of Mass or in moments of intense prayer. The union between contemplation and study in his life was perfect. His mystical experiences were not escapes from reality, but moments of profound illumination that enriched his theological understanding. Tradition holds that after a particular vision, Thomas declared that everything he had written seemed straw compared to what he had seen. The composition of the Corpus Christi office revealed his contemplative soul. His Eucharistic hymns, especially the Pangelingua and Adoro Te Devote, combine theological precision with the tenderest devotion. These texts continue to nurture the Eucharistic piety of the Church. His Dominican brothers often found him in ecstasy before the Blessed Sacrament. On these occasions, his face glowed with a supernatural light, and he seemed to physically rise from the ground. However, Thomas maintained deep humility regarding these mystical gifts. The synthesis between reason and faith in his life was not theoretical, but existential. For Thomas, study was a form of prayer, and prayer illuminated his study. This perfect integration between intellect and spirit defines his legacy. Chapter 9. The Summa Theologica. The Summa Theologica represents the pinnacle of Thomistic thought. This monumental work, conceived as a manual for beginner students, became the most influential theological synthesis in the history of the Church. The structure of the Summa reveals Thomas's pedagogical genius. Each question is divided into articles that follow a rigorous method: objections, sed contra, response, and replies. This method not only clarifies the truth, but also teaches theological thinking. The first part deals with God and creation, the second with morality and Christian life, the third with Christ and the sacraments. This organization reflects the circular movement of reality. Everything proceeds from God and everything returns to Him through Christ. The work remained unfinished. During a Mass on December 6, 1273, Thomas had a mystical experience that led him to declare, "Everything I have written seems like straw compared to what I have seen." After this, he never wrote again. The Summa represents more than an intellectual achievement. It is the testimony of a life dedicated to the pursuit of divine truth. Although unfinished, its influence on Catholic thought has been constant through the centuries. Chapter 10. The Angelic Doctor. The title of Angelic Doctor reflects both the purity of Thomas's life and the elevation of his thought. His influence on Catholic theology has been so profound that the Church considers him the common and universal master in theological and philosophical matters. His teachings on the relationship between faith and reason established a lasting paradigm. Thomas demonstrated that the truths of faith and the truths of reason cannot contradict each other, as both proceed from the same God. This synthesis remains fundamental to Catholic thought. The clarity and precision of his theological method revolutionized the teaching of theology. His ability to distinguish without separating and to unite without confusing has provided the Church with invaluable tools to address new theological challenges. Popes throughout the centuries have consistently recommended the study of Saint Thomas. Leo XIII, in his encyclical Aeterni Patris, proposed him as a reliable guide for Christian philosophy, initiating a renewed interest in his thought. His influence transcends the Catholic realm. Philosophers and theologians from various traditions recognize in Thomas a master of systematic thought and a model of dialogue between faith and reason. Chapter 11. The Final Days. The last months of Thomas's life were marked by intense mystical experiences. After the vision of December 6, 1273, he abandoned writing, declaring that everything he had written seemed like straw compared to what he had seen. Called by Gregory Dix to participate in the Council of Lyon, Thomas set out, despite his fragile health. On the way, he struck his head against a branch in the forest of Fossa Nova, and his health rapidly deteriorated. The Cistercian monks of Fossa Nova received him with veneration. In his final days, at the monks' request, he dictated a commentary on the Song of Songs, thus uniting his last intellectual effort with the expression of divine love. Before receiving viaticum, he pronounced a moving profession of faith in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the mystery he had so long contemplated and defended throughout his life. He died on March 7, 1274, before reaching 50 years of age. His last words were of absolute confidence in divine mercy and total adherence to the Church's teaching. Chapter 12. Canonization and Legacy. Thomas's canonization in 1323 by John XXIII was the official recognition of what many already knew, that in him holiness and wisdom had exceptionally united. His body was solemnly transferred to Toulouse, where the Dominicans built him a magnificent tomb. The miracles attributed to his intercession began almost immediately after his death and continue to this day. St. Thomas's influence on the Church has not diminished over the centuries. The Council of Trent placed the Summa alongside the Bible on the altar during its sessions, and Vatican II cited him more than any other doctor of the Church. Thomistic schools have flourished worldwide, and his theological method continues to train generations of students. His ability to harmonize faith and reason offers answers to many contemporary challenges. His legacy is not limited to theology and philosophy. The balance he achieved between contemplation and action, between study and prayer, between intellectual rigor and humility, remains a model for today's Christians. Chapter 13. Prayer to Saint Thomas Aquinas. O glorious Saint Thomas, Angelic Doctor, who united in perfect harmony the highest wisdom with the deepest humility, we beseech you to illuminate our minds with the brilliance of your doctrine and to inflame our hearts with the fire of your charity. Grant us through your intercession the grace to understand what you taught and to live what we comprehend. May your love for truth guide us, and your humility preserve us from intellectual pride. As you found on the cross the source of all wisdom, help us to see in it our salvation and our light. May your devotion to the Holy Eucharist inspire us to seek in this sacrament the source of our spiritual life and the center of our existence. And just as you knew how to unite the highest speculation with the tenderest piety, grant us the grace to be wise in faith and steadfast in charity. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.